They say a father is supposed to protect his daughter from the monsters under her bed. But what happens when the monster is sleeping in her bed? What happens when the monster is the man you paid for? My son-in-law thought he could break my little girl and use my life savings to fund his affairs. He thought because I drive a 20-year-old truck and wear work boots that I was just a senile old man he could push around. He was wrong. Dead wrong. When I saw him wipe his Italian leather shoe with my daughter's hair, something inside me did not just break, it detonated. But I did not scream. I did not attack. I simply began the countdown to his total destruction. Before I tell you how I took down a millionaire with nothing but a hidden camera and the truth, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if you believe that family is not just about blood, but about respect. Let me know in the comments what city you are watching from. My name is Harrison. I am 62 years old, and my hands are rough like sandpaper. That is what 40 years of laying bricks and pouring concrete does to a man. I built half the foundations in this city, but I never imagined the foundation of my own family was rotting from the inside out. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of humid night in Connecticut that makes your shirt stick to your back. I was not supposed to be there. In fact, my son-in-law Derek had made it very clear that I was only welcome when I had a check to sign. But a father's intuition is a strange thing. It is a knot in your stomach that tightens when something is not right. And that night, the knot was pulling so tight I could barely breathe. I pulled my 1998 Ford F-150 up the long, winding driveway of the Greenwich estate. The engine sputtered and coughed a rough mechanical wheeze that echoed through the manicured gardens. I killed the ignition, but the silence that followed was even louder. The driveway looked like a showroom for a luxury car dealership. There was a silver Porsche, a black Maserati, and 2 Range Rovers. And there sat my truck covered in dust from the construction site, rusting at the wheel wells, looking like a dirty stain on a silk sheet. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment. My knuckles turned white. I bought this house. I paid the down payment. I paid for the renovations. And yet sitting here I felt like a trespasser. I did not go to the front door. I knew better. The front door was for Derek's important friends, the bankers and the politicians. I went around the side through the service entrance near the kitchen. It was a habit I could not break. I was the help. I was the wallet. I was never the guest. As I walked across the grass, I could hear them. The sound of crystal glasses clinking. The roar of laughter. It was a party. A loud, boisterous celebration on a Tuesday night. I had not been invited. That was fine. I did not come for the canapés. I came because Emily, my daughter, had not answered her phone in 3 days. The kitchen was empty, but the double doors leading to the main living area were cracked open just an inch. A sliver of golden light spilled out onto the dark hallway floor. I moved closer, my work boots heavy but silent. I learned how to walk quietly on job sites years ago, so I would not disturb the owners. Now I was using that skill in the home of my own child. I peeked through the crack. The living room was magnificent. I remembered laying that oak flooring myself, choosing each plank so the grain would flow like water. But no one was looking at the floor. There were about 20 people. Men in tailored suits that cost more than my truck. Women in dresses that shimmered under the chandelier light. In the center of the room stood Derek. He looked like a king holding court. He was holding a glass of vintage red wine, laughing at a joke someone had just told. He looked healthy. He looked rich. He looked powerful. And then I saw her. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like someone had punched me in the solar plexus. Emily was on the floor. She was not sitting. She was on her hands and knees. She was wearing a simple gray nightgown that looked old and frayed, a stark contrast to the designer clothes around her. Her hair, usually so shiny and full of life, was matted and hung limp over her face. She looked thin, too thin. Her arms were trembling as she tried to crawl forward. The room was loud, but nobody was helping her. It was as if she was invisible, or worse, as if she was part of the entertainment. Emily reached out a shaking hand toward the coffee table, perhaps trying to pull herself up. But her coordination was gone. Her hand flailed and she knocked into Derek's leg. The wine glass in his hand tilted. A splash of dark red liquid cascaded down. It missed his suit, but it landed squarely on his left shoe, a pristine, polished Italian leather loafer. The music did not stop. The chatter did not cease. But the temperature in that room seemed to drop 20 degrees in a second. Derek stopped laughing. He looked down at his shoe. Then he looked at the woman on the floor. His wife. My daughter. I waited for him to bend down. I waited for him to help her up, to ask if she was okay, to tell her it was just a little wine. That is what a husband does. That is what a man does. But Derek did not move his hand to help her. Instead, he moved his foot. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his wine-stained shoe and placed it on Emily's shoulder. I froze. My brain could not process what my eyes were seeing. He did not kick her. It was worse than that. He pressed down. He put his weight on her fragile shoulder, pushing her down toward the floorboards. It was the way a man steps on a cigarette butt to extinguish it. It was casual. It was dismissive. It was an act of absolute dominance. Emily did not fight back. She did not scream. She just collapsed under the weight, her cheek pressing against the hard wood. Her eyes were open, but there was no light in them. They were glassy, unfocused, staring at nothing. She looked drugged. She looked broken. Derek kept his foot on her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he removed it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. He bent down, but not to touch her. He used the cloth to wipe the wine from his shoe. When he was finished, he didn't put the handkerchief back in his pocket. He dropped it. It fluttered down and landed right on Emily's face, covering her eyes. "Look at that clumsiness," Derek said, his voice loud enough for the circle around him to hear. "I apologize, everyone. It is difficult to find good help these days, especially when the help is your wife." A few people chuckled. A nervous, cruel laughter. That was the moment. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The vibration of the engine in my truck was gone, replaced by a pounding in my ears that sounded like a war drum. I forgot about the guests. I forgot about the law. I forgot that I was an old man with a bad back. I pushed the double doors open. They swung wide, hitting the walls with a loud crash that silenced the room instantly. The music seemed to cut off. The laughter died in their throats. Every head turned toward the kitchen entrance. I stepped out of the shadows and into the golden light. I was wearing my dusty work pants, a flannel shirt stained with sweat, and my steel-toed boots. I must have looked like a madman to them. But I did not care. I walked straight toward Derek. I did not run. I marched. My boots crunched on the expensive floor with a heavy, rhythmic thud. 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 Derek turned. The smirk on his face faltered for a fraction of a second, but then it returned sharper and colder than before. "Well, look who it is," Derek said, spreading his arms as if welcoming a clown to the circus. "Harrison, the builder. Did you come to fix the toilet, because I think the guest bathroom is clogged?" I did not answer. I did not look at him. My eyes were locked on Emily. She was still on the floor, the silk handkerchief covering her face like a shroud. She had not moved. She had not reacted to the crash of the doors or the sound of my name. "Emily," I said. My voice was low, rough, trembling with a rage I was trying to contain. She did not answer. I reached her and knelt down. My knees cracked, but I didn't feel the pain. I gently pulled the handkerchief off her face. "Baby," I whispered. "It's Dad. I'm here." Her head lulled to the side. She looked at me, but she didn't see me. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing the blue of her irises. She blinked slowly like a doll with weighted eyelids. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice was dry, cracked like dead leaves scraping together. She did not know me. My own daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the woman I had walked down the aisle just 3 years ago, looked at me with the blank stare of a stranger. I looked up at Derek. He was sipping his wine again, looking bored. "What did you do to her?" I asked. The volume of my voice was rising, echoing off the high ceilings. Derek sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "We have discussed this, Harrison. Emily is not well. She is having one of her episodes. The doctor said she needs strict discipline and medication. You are upsetting her. You are upsetting my guests." Discipline. I stood up. The rage was no longer a knot in my stomach. It was a fire in my throat. "You stepped on her. I saw you. You treated her like a dog." Derek laughed. A cold, dry sound. "She needs to learn boundaries, Harrison. Just like you do. Now get out of my house before I have security throw you out. You are embarrassing yourself. And you are embarrassing Emily." He took a step towards me, towering in his expensive suit. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to kill a man. I balled my hand into a fist. My right hand, the one that had held a trowel for 40 years, the one that was hard as rock. I could feel the urge to swing, to shatter that smug jaw, to wipe that smile off his face forever. I pulled my arm back. The room gasped. 2 large men in black suits stepped out from the corners of the room. Security. But it wasn't the guards that stopped me. It was Derek's next words. "Go ahead, old man," Derek whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Hit me. Please. Give me a reason to call the police. Give me a reason to show the judge that you are violent and unstable. Because if you touch me, I will make sure you never see Emily again. I will put her in a state facility so fast, your head will spin." I froze. My fist hovered in the air. He knew he had won. He knew the law was a weapon, and he was holding the trigger. I looked down at Emily. She was humming a soft, broken tune, oblivious to the war happening above her head. If I went to jail tonight, she would be alone with him. Totally alone. I slowly lowered my hand. The shame burned my face hotter than the sun. I had to retreat. Not because I was weak, but because I had to be smart. "I am leaving," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "But this isn't over, Derek." Derek smiled and turned his back on me. "Close the service door on your way out, Harrison, and try not to get dirt on the driveway." I turned around. I walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the eyes of 20 strangers burning into my back. I felt small. I felt defeated. But as I walked out into the cool night air, as I listened to the door lock click behind me, the tears in my eyes dried up. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a helpless old builder. He forgot one thing. A builder knows how to tear things down, brick by brick. I got into my truck. I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there in the dark watching the lights of the house. I reached into my glove box and pulled out a small notepad. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the date. And I wrote down one sentence. War begins today, because I saw something else in that room. Something Derek didn't think I noticed. Under the sofa, hidden by the shadows, was a small, blinking blue light. It wasn't a toy. It was a router for a dedicated server. And next to it, a stack of hard drives. My son-in-law wasn't just abusing my daughter. He was running a business. And I was going to find out exactly what he was selling. The 2 security guards moved with a speed that defied their size. Before I could launch my fist forward, before I could connect with that smug jawline, I felt arms like hydraulic presses clamp down on my shoulders. They did not just hold me back. They wrenched my arms behind my back with a force that sent a jolt of pain shooting through my rotator cuffs. I grunted, struggling against them, my boots scraping uselessly against the polished floor, but it was like trying to fight a forklift. I was strong, but I was 62, and these men were in their prime, paid to be immovable objects. Derek did not flinch. He did not even spill the remaining drops of wine in his glass. He watched my struggle with a look of mild amusement, as if he were watching a nature documentary about a dying animal. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, savoring it, before placing the empty glass on a passing waiter's tray. Then, without saying a word to me, he snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the hallway emerged a woman I had not noticed before. She was wearing a white nurse's uniform that was too tight and too short to be professional. Her name tag read Valerie, but there was no compassion in her eyes. Her face was hard, her makeup severe. She walked over to Emily, who was still huddled on the floor, humming that broken tune. Valerie did not help my daughter up. She grabbed Emily by the upper arm, her fingernails digging into the thin flesh. "Up we go, princess," Valerie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that sounded more like a threat. Emily whimpered. It was a sound that tore my heart in two. I surged forward again, ignoring the pain in my shoulders. "Get your hands off her," I roared. My voice echoed off the high ceilings, making the guests flinch. "She is not a prisoner." Derek stepped between me and them, blocking my view of my daughter. "Actually, Harrison, that is exactly what she is. But we prefer the term ward of the state, or in this case, ward of her loving husband." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to me. He just held it up close enough for me to see the official seal of the probate court. "Do you know what this is, Harrison?" "It is a conservatorship order, signed by Judge Miller last month. It states that due to Emily's severe cognitive decline and emotional instability, she is incapable of making decisions for herself. It gives me full legal control over her finances, her medical care, and her visitation rights." I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Cognitive decline. My daughter was a valedictorian. She was brilliant until she met him. "You drugged her," I spat out. "You made her this way." Derek chuckled, tucking the paper back into his pocket. "Prove it. And while you are trying to prove it, remember this. I am her legal guardian. That means I decide who she sees. And right now I am deciding that her father is a violent, unstable influence who triggers her episodes." I looked past him. Valerie was dragging Emily toward the stairs. Emily looked back at me, her eyes wide with confusion. "Dad," she whispered. But Valerie yanked her forward, and they disappeared around the corner. "Let her go," I shouted, struggling again. Derek stepped closer, his face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive wine on his breath. "Listen to me very carefully, old man. You have two choices tonight. You can keep fighting these gentlemen. You might even land a punch. And if you do, I will have you arrested for assaulting a senior citizen's caregivers and trespassing. But that is the easy part." He paused, letting the silence stretch out. "The hard part is what happens to Emily. If you cause a scene, if you call the police, if you try to sue me, I will have her transferred. Right now, she lives in a mansion. But if you push me, I will have her committed to the state psychiatric facility in Bridgeport. You know the one. The underfunded one with the barred windows and the screams at night. I will have her heavily sedated and strapped to a bed 24 hours a day for her own safety." My blood ran cold. He knew exactly where to hit me. He knew I would take a bullet for her, but I could not let her suffer in a place like that. "Is that what you want, Harrison?" Derek whispered. "Do you want your little girl in a padded cell wearing a straitjacket, wondering why her daddy abandoned her? Or do you want to walk out that door, go back to your pathetic life, and let me take care of my wife in luxury?" I stopped struggling. The fight did not leave me, but the movement did. I went limp in the guard's grip. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. I saw the hollowness in his eyes. He did not care about Emily. He did not even hate her. She was just an asset to him. A broken ATM machine. I will leave, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Smart choice, Derek said. He nodded to the guards. Escort Mr. Harrison to his vehicle, and make sure he leaves the property. The guards released my arms, but kept their hands on my shoulders, steering me toward the front door. I did not look back at the guests. I did not look back at the stairs where my daughter had vanished. I walked with my head down, not in shame, but to hide the look in my eyes. They shoved me out the front door, not gently. I stumbled down the stone steps, catching myself on the railing before I hit the pavement. Stay away, Harrison, one of the guards grunted. Next time we won't be so polite. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. The lock clicked. Then the deadbolt slid into place. I stood there for a moment in the cool night air. The music from inside started up again. The laughter resumed. To them, the interruption was over. The crazy old man was gone. I walked to my truck. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of restraint. I opened the door and climbed into the cab. The smell of old coffee and sawdust was comforting. It was real. Unlike the perfume and lies inside that house. I gripped the steering wheel, squeezing it until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to drive this truck right through the front door. I wanted to tear that house down board by board. But Derek was right about one thing. Violence would only hurt Emily. He had the law on his side. He had the judges. He had the doctors. I looked up at the window on the second floor. The light was on. That was the master bedroom. Emily was in there with that woman, Valerie. I am not leaving you, baby, I whispered to the darkness. I am just going to get better weapons. I started the engine. The truck roared to life, a defiant growl in the polite silence of the neighborhood. I did not drive away immediately. I pulled the truck down the street and turned into a small service road that ran behind the estate, obscured by a line of thick pine trees. I killed the lights. I killed the engine. I reached under my seat and pulled out my old military binoculars. Derek thought he had won the battle because he had the paper shield of the law. But he forgot that a war is not won in a single skirmish. He thought he had locked me out, but he didn't know that I had spent my entire life finding ways into places where I didn't belong. I raised the binoculars to my eyes and focused on the window. I settled in for the long haul. I would watch. I would wait. And I would find the crack in his armor. Because every structure has a weak point. You just have to be patient enough to find it. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought a blinding headache and a sense of dread that settled deep in my bones. I had spent the night in the cab of my truck, watching the house like a ghost. But when dawn broke, I knew I needed more than just binoculars. I needed answers. I needed to understand the enemy. Derek had hidden behind the shield of medical authority, claiming Emily was sick, claiming she was broken. So I went to the source of that claim. The private practice of Dr. Aris was located in a glass building that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a place of healing. The lobby smelled of expensive coffee and leather, not antiseptic. This was concierge medicine. This was healthcare for people who thought they could buy their way out of mortality. I walked in wearing my cleanest shirt, but I still felt out of place. The receptionist looked at my boots with disdain, but when I mentioned Derek's name, her attitude shifted. Power recognizes power, and apparently my son-in-law wielded enough of it here to open doors. Dr. Aris did not keep me waiting. He wanted to handle me. He wanted to neutralize the threat I represented. His office was vast, with a view of the city skyline that probably cost more a month than I made in a year. Aris himself was a small man, impeccably groomed with silver hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Please sit down, Mr. Harrison," he said, gesturing to a chair that was lower than his own. It was a classic power move. He wanted to look down on me. I sat. I did not want tea. I did not want water. I want to see my daughter's files, I said. I want to know why she didn't recognize her own father. Aris sighed, a practiced sound of professional sympathy. He opened a thick leather folder on his desk. He did not hand it to me. He turned it around, pointing at complex charts and scans that looked like storms on a weather map. I understand your distress, he began, his voice smooth like oil. It is always hard for families to accept the reality of early-onset cognitive degeneration. Emily is suffering from a very aggressive form of frontal lobe deterioration. It affects memory, emotional regulation, and motor skills. He tapped a gray smudge on the brain scan. You see this shadowing here? This is irreversible damage. To be honest, Mr. Harrison, I am surprised you did not notice the signs earlier. Given your late wife's history, we believe this is genetic. A hereditary curse, if you will. I gripped the armrests of the chair. My wife Sarah had died of a stroke. It was sudden. It was tragic. But she was never crazy. She never forgot my name. Do not bring Sarah into this, I warned, my voice low. Aris leaned back, steepling his fingers. I am not trying to be cruel. I am being clinical. Emily has the same genetic markers. The outbursts, the confusion, the catatonic states. It is all part of the progression. Derek has been a saint, truly. He has hired the best specialists. He has kept her at home when most husbands would have institutionalized her. The medication we have her on is a heavy sedative, yes, but it is necessary to stop her from hurting herself. He spoke with such confidence. He used words like neuroplasticity and synaptic misfiring. He threw Latin terms at me like stones, building a wall of jargon that I could not climb. For a moment, just a terrifying moment, I doubted myself. I looked at the gray smudge on the paper. Was I wrong? Was I just a stubborn old man in denial? Maybe Emily really was sick. Maybe Derek was protecting her from herself, and I was the villain here. The guilt washed over me. If this was genetic, if this was something Sarah passed down, then it was my fault too. I had given her this life. I had given her this blood. I rubbed my face with my hands, feeling the stubble on my chin. I felt small. I felt uneducated. I felt defeated by the weight of science. But then the sun shifted. A beam of light cut through the window and hit the doctor's wrist. It glittered. I looked up. Dr. Aris was checking the time. On his left wrist sat a watch. It wasn't just a watch. I know construction, and I know the cost of materials, but I also read magazines. I know what success looks like. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, stainless steel with a blue dial. I froze. That was a $100,000 watch. Maybe more on the secondary market. I looked around the office again. The furniture was custom. The art on the walls was original. This was a doctor's office, yes. But general practitioners, even specialists, do not wear the price of a small house on their wrist unless they have a very specific, very lucrative type of clientele, or unless they are being paid to write fiction. The doubt in my mind evaporated, replaced by the cold clarity of suspicion. A doctor who treats patients with kindness does not wear a trophy like that while telling a father his daughter is brain dead. That watch was a bribe. It was a payout. I needed to be sure. I needed proof that this file was a fabrication. Just as I was staring at the watch, the phone on his desk buzzed. A red light flashed. Aris glanced at it and frowned. "Excuse me," he said, standing up. "This is the hospital board. I have to take this. I will be right back. Take a moment to process what I have told you." He walked out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him. He was arrogant. He thought I was broken. He thought I was just a grieving, confused blue-collar worker who wouldn't understand what he was looking at. He left the file open on the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did not hesitate. I did not think about the cameras that might be in the room. I thought about Emily on the floor. I lunged forward. I did not try to read the charts. I knew I wouldn't understand the fake medical data. I looked for the identification numbers, the trail. At the top of the page, stamped in red ink, was a case number and a reference code for the lab that supposedly processed the scans. Below it was a pharmacy authorization code for the heavy sedatives. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I hovered the camera over the document. Click. I got the case number. Click. I got the lab reference. Click. I got the doctor's signature at the bottom, a jagged scrawl that signed away my daughter's freedom. I heard the doorknob turn. I threw myself back into the chair, shoving the phone into my pocket, just as Dr. Aris walked back in. My heart was in my throat, beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. I looked down at my knees, feigning despair. I tried to look like the broken man he wanted me to be. "I am sorry, Dr. Aris," I said, my voice trembling. It is a lot to take in." He sat down, looking pleased with himself. He smoothed his tie. "Of course. It is a tragedy. But you must trust us. You must trust Derek. We are doing what is best for Emily. The best thing you can do is let us handle her care and not interfere. Stress makes her condition worse." I stood up slowly. I looked him in the eye. I saw the greed behind the spectacles. I saw the corruption behind the degree. "I understand," I said. "I won't cause any more trouble. I just wanted to know." "Good," Aris said, standing up to shake my hand. His palm was soft, unused to hard work. "You are a good father, Harrison. You are doing the right thing by stepping back." I shook his hand. It took every ounce of my willpower not to crush his fingers. I walked out of that office. I walked past the receptionist. I walked out of the glass building. As soon as I hit the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone. I looked at the photos. They were clear. I had the numbers. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I knew someone who would. Dr. Aris thought he had used science to blind me. He thought he had used big words to scare me off. But he made a mistake. He flashed his wealth. He showed his hand. He wasn't a doctor. He was a partner in crime. And I was about to audit his entire operation. I walked to my truck, the sun feeling different now. It wasn't just bringing heat. It was bringing light. And I was going to shine it into the darkest corners of their conspiracy. Next stop, the pharmacy. It was time to find out what exactly they were pumping into my daughter's veins. I pulled my truck up to the heavy iron gates of the estate for the second time in 24 hours. But this time I did not crash through. I did not storm in. I pressed the intercom button and waited. I had to swallow my pride. I had to taste the bitter bile of submission. Derek had made the rules clear. If I wanted to see Emily, I had to play by his script. I had to be the repentant, broken old man who accepted his authority. The gate buzzed open slowly. I drove up the driveway at a crawl. The house loomed ahead, massive and silent, like a mausoleum built of stone and money. I parked my truck far away from the entrance, just as I had been instructed. I walked to the front door, my hat in my hands. Derek did not answer the door. It was Valerie. She stood there in her tight white uniform, looking at me with a mixture of boredom and contempt. She checked her watch, a cheap digital thing that beeped loudly. "You have 5 minutes," she said. Her voice was flat. "Mr. Derek is in a meeting and does not want to be disturbed. And if you upset her, if you raise your voice, or if you try to take any photos, the visit ends immediately. Do you understand?" I nodded. "I understand." She stepped aside and I entered the house. The air inside was cool, conditioned to a perfect temperature, but it felt stale. It lacked the warmth of a home. We did not go to the master bedroom upstairs. Instead, Valerie led me down a hallway on the ground floor toward the back of the house. This used to be the guest wing. Now it felt like a quarantine zone. Valerie opened a door at the end of the hall. There she was. Emily was sitting in a wheelchair facing the window. The curtains were drawn, letting in only a sliver of gray afternoon light. The room was sparse. The beautiful furniture that used to be here was gone, replaced by medical equipment that hummed and clicked rhythmically. "Emily," I whispered. She did not turn. Her head was slumped forward, her chin resting on her chest. I walked closer, my boots making no sound on the carpet. As I got closer, the smell hit me. It was faint at first, but unmistakable to anyone who has spent time in hospitals or nursing homes. It was the sharp, acrid scent of ammonia. Urine. Old urine that had soaked into fabric and skin. But layered over it, thick and cloying, was the smell of cheap lavender air freshener. It was a chemical mask, a desperate attempt to cover up the stench of neglect. My stomach churned. Derek had millions of dollars. He wore suits that cost thousands. And yet my daughter was sitting here smelling like she had been left in a soiled bed for hours. I reached her side and knelt down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the curtains down and let the light in. But Valerie was standing by the door, her arms crossed, watching my every move like a hawk. I had to be calm. I had to be the actor in the play. "Hi, baby," I said softly. I reached out and took her hand. It shocked me. Her hand was ice cold. It felt fragile, like a bundle of dry twigs wrapped in parchment paper. I could feel every knuckle, every tendon. She had lost so much weight. Where was the vibrant, healthy woman who loved to play tennis? Where was the girl who used to help me carry lumber on the weekends? She was fading away. She was evaporating right in front of me. I rubbed her hand between mine, trying to transfer some of my warmth, some of my life force into her. "Emily, look at me. It is Dad." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. Her movement was jerky, mechanical. Her eyes found mine. They were sunken dark circles bruising the skin underneath. Her pupils were dilated again, swimming in a chemical haze. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition. Just a spark in the dark. She tried to speak. Her lips moved dry and cracked. A small sound came out like a whimper. I leaned in closer. I ignored the smell. I ignored the presence of the guard at the door. I just wanted to hear her voice. "I am here," I whispered. "I am not going anywhere. I am going to fix this." She leaned forward, her forehead almost touching mine. Her breathing was shallow and ragged. She closed her eyes, and a single tear leaked out, cutting a clean track through the grime on her cheek. Then she opened her eyes again. The fog seemed to clear for a split second. The dilated pupils contracted. She looked sharp. She looked terrified. She leaned in until her lips brushed my ear. I expected her to say she loved me. I expected her to ask for help. I expected her to say she was in pain. But she didn't say any of those things. She whispered one word, a single distinct word that made no sense in this room of sickness and shadows. "Blueberry." I pulled back, slightly confused. Blueberry. Was she hungry? Was she hallucinating about food? I looked at her face. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking past me, staring intently at something, her eyes wide with a desperate intensity. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there but the blank wall. Then she said it again, louder this time, with an urgency that sent shivers down my spine. "Blueberry." From the doorway, there was a sudden movement. Valerie pushed herself off the wall. The boredom was gone from her face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. "That is enough," Valerie barked. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet room like a whip. She marched over her rubber-soled shoes, squeaking on the floor. She grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back. "What is wrong?" I asked, trying to hold my ground. "She is just talking. She is hungry. She wants fruit." "She is delirious," Valerie snapped. "She doesn't know what she is saying. The doctor warned us about this. When she starts babbling, she gets agitated. You are upsetting her. The visit is over." She stepped between me and the wheelchair, using her body as a shield. She grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and spun Emily around, facing her away from me. "No, wait," I said. "I just got here. I have only been here 2 minutes." I said, "Get out," Valerie hissed. She reached for a button on the wall. "Do not make me call security again." Mr. Derek was very clear. "One strike and you are out." I looked at the back of Emily's head. She had gone silent again. Her head slumped back down. The spark was gone. I looked at Valerie. Her chest was heaving slightly. She was breathing hard. Why was she so scared? It was just a word. It was just the name of a fruit. Why did the word blueberry make the nurse jump as if I had pulled a gun? I held up my hands in surrender. Okay. I am going. Do not hurt her." I backed away toward the door. I kept my eyes on Valerie. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Emily, checking her pulse, whispering something angry and hushed into her ear. It looked less like medical care and more like an interrogation. I walked out of the room. The hallway felt longer than before. My heart was pounding with a different rhythm now. It wasn't just anger. It was curiosity. It was the thrill of the hunt. Blueberry. I replayed the sound of her voice in my head. It wasn't a request. It was a message. Emily was drugged, she was weak, she was trapped, but she was still in there. She had used her 5 seconds of clarity to give me a key. I just had to find the lock. I walked out the front door. The sun was blinding. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I drove down the driveway away from the prison that held my daughter, I didn't cry. I didn't slam the dashboard. I started thinking. Blueberry. Was it a password? Was it a place? Was it a memory from her childhood? I thought about the summers we spent at the lake house. We used to pick berries. But we picked blackberries, not blueberries. I thought about her favorite foods. She hated blueberry pie. Then a memory surfaced. A small, insignificant detail from years ago. When Emily and Derek first got married, they bought a dog. A small, ugly French bulldog that Derek hated, but Emily adored. She treated that dog like a child. What was the dog's name? I frowned, merging onto the highway. The dog disappeared about 2 years ago. Derek told me it ran away. Emily had been devastated. She cried for weeks. I closed my eyes for a second at a red light digging through the archives of my memory. I remembered Emily posting a photo on social media, her holding the puppy. The caption, "Me and my little blueberry." My eyes snapped open. The light turned green. Blueberry wasn't a fruit. Blueberry was the dog. The dog that supposedly ran away. Why would she whisper the name of a dead dog to me? Why would that specific name make Valerie panic? Unless the dog didn't run away. Unless the dog was the start of all this. Or maybe, just maybe, Blueberry wasn't gone. I stepped on the gas. The truck lurched forward. I wasn't going back to the hotel. I was going to the one person who might know the truth about what happened to that dog. I was going to find Martha, the housekeeper Derek fired last year. Derek thought he had silenced Emily. He thought he had broken her mind. But he forgot that love speaks a language that drugs cannot erase. He forgot that a father and daughter have a connection that transcends walls and guards. He gave me 5 minutes. He thought it was an act of mercy. But in those 5 minutes, he gave me the weapon that would end him. I did not go back to the hotel that night. The idea of lying in a strange bed staring at a ceiling fan while my daughter sat in her own filth just a few miles away was impossible. Sleep was a luxury for men who had peace of mind, and I had none. Instead, I drove my truck up to the ridge overlooking the estate. It was a spot teenagers used to use for drinking, but tonight it was empty. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the valley below, And right in the center, glowing like a radioactive sore, was Derek's house. I reclined the seat of my Ford, as far back as it would go, which wasn't much. The springs dug into my lower back, a familiar ache that reminded me of my years pouring concrete foundations. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket I kept behind the seat for emergencies. This was an emergency. It was the coldest kind of emergency. I settled in with my binoculars. These weren't birdwatching toys. They were military surplus, heavy and rubberized, capable of gathering light even in the dead of night. I adjusted the focus until the house jumped into sharp relief. It looked peaceful from here. It looked majestic. But I knew it was a lie. It was a beautiful tomb. The hours ticked by slowly. Midnight came and went. One by one, the lights in the neighborhood flickered out. The world went to sleep, but not the house below me. At 2 a.m, the ground floor was dark, but the master bedroom on the second floor, the room that faced the valley, was still blazing with light. That was the room Emily and Derek used to share. That was the room where I had installed the crown molding myself as a wedding gift. I watched the window. The curtains were sheer, offering no privacy against the darkness outside. I saw movement. 2 shadows passed back and forth. One was tall and broad. Derek. The other was curvaceous, moving with a fluid confidence. It wasn't Emily. Emily was in a wheelchair downstairs, smelling of urine. This was Valerie. I watched as the shadows merged. I watched as Derek pulled the woman close, his hands roaming over her body with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. They weren't checking medical charts. They weren't discussing patient care. They were lovers. I lowered the binoculars for a moment, squeezing my eyes shut. I had suspected it, of course. The way she looked at him, the way she defended him. But seeing it was different. It was a physical blow. That woman, that fake nurse, was sleeping in my daughter's bed, living my daughter's life, while actively participating in her torture. It wasn't just greed. It was a complete erasure of Emily's existence. They had buried her alive so they could play house on top of her grave. I took a sip of cold coffee from my thermos. It was bitter, but it kept the rage focused. I raised the binoculars again. 3 a.m. The lights in the bedroom finally dimmed, but they didn't go out completely. Then movement caught my eye down below. A pair of headlights cut through the mist at the bottom of the hill. A vehicle was approaching the estate. It wasn't a sports car. It was a box truck, a delivery van. I checked my watch. Who delivers packages at 3 a.m? The truck didn't go to the front gate. It turned onto the service road, the same one I had used to sneak in. It bypassed the main entrance and rolled quietly around to the back of the house near the kitchen and the basement access. The driver killed the lights before the truck even came to a full stop. This wasn't a standard Amazon delivery. This was something off the books. I zoomed in. The side of the truck had a logo, but it was dark. I squinted, straining my eyes against the lenses. It was a stylized grapevine. Vintage Vaults. I knew that name. They were a high-end wine distributor. They dealt in bottles that cost more than a mortgage payment. 2 men jumped out of the truck. The back door of the house opened immediately. Derek stepped out. He was wearing a silk robe, holding a flashlight. He didn't look like a grieving husband dealing with a sick wife. He looked like a CEO supervising a shipment. The men started unloading crates. Wooden crates. I counted them. 1, 2, 5, 10. I focused on the markings on the wood. Petrus. Romance Conti. I did the math in my head. Each of those crates could be worth $50,000. Maybe more. He was stocking the cellar. He was buying liquid gold while claiming he needed control of Emily's trust fund for her medical bills. But then the cargo changed. After the wine, the men started pulling out different boxes. These were cardboard, sleek and black. They weren't wine, they were electronics. I adjusted the focus ring trying to read the labels. I caught a glimpse of a logo as Derek shined his flashlight on a box to check the invoice. It was a green eye, NVIDIA, and another box that looked like a server rack unit. Computer parts, high-end processing units, the kind of stuff used for massive data crunching, or crypto mining, or something else that required immense power. Why would a man who claimed his wife was bankrupting him with medical costs be buying industrial-grade server equipment in the middle of the night? Derek pointed to the basement door. The men hauled the electronics down into the darkness. This wasn't just a lifestyle. This was an operation. The delivery took 20 minutes. Derek signed a clipboard, handed the driver a thick envelope that I assumed was cash, and waved them off. The truck reversed and drove away, disappearing into the night. Derek stood there for a moment, looking out at the darkness. He looked right up at the hill where I was parked. For a second, I thought he saw me. I held my breath, my hand hovering over the ignition key. But he just stretched, yawned, and walked back inside, locking the door behind him. I grabbed my notepad. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the name, Vintage Vaults. And I wrote down the license plate of the truck, which I had managed to catch as it turned under a street lamp. I looked at the notes. The picture was becoming clearer. They told the court Emily was insane. They told the world they were exhausted caregivers. But the truth was in the receipts. Derek was washing money, or he was hiding it. He was converting Emily's inheritance into untraceable assets, wine that could be sold for cash, cryptocurrency that could be moved offshore. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a financial predator. And Emily. She wasn't a patient. She was the hostage that kept the bank account open. As long as she was alive and incapacitated, he had the power of attorney. If she died, the trust might go to me or to charity. If she got better, she would take it all back. So he needed her in that wheelchair. He needed her drooling and confused. Her sickness was his salary. I slammed the notebook shut. The anger was so hot, it felt like it was burning a hole in my chest. I wanted to drive down there and burn the house down. I wanted to drag him out by his silk robe and make him explain the servers and the wine to a jury. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to know exactly what he was doing with those computers. I needed to know where the money was going. I looked at the license plate number I had written down. That was my next thread. I would find out who sent that truck. I would find out who signed the invoices. I started the engine of my truck. The heater sputtered to life, blowing lukewarm air onto my frozen hands. "Enjoy your wine, Derek," I whispered to the windshield. "Drink it while you can, because I am going to make sure it is the last thing you ever own." I put the truck in gear and rolled slowly down the backside of the hill. The sun was starting to crack the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. It was fitting. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a hunter. And the sun was rising on his judgment day. The address I had for Martha was in the hollowed-out heart of Bridgeport. It was only 20 miles from Derek's palace in Greenwich, but it might as well have been on a different planet. Here the streets were not lined with manicured hedges, but with overflowing garbage cans and rusted chain-link fences. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and desperation. I parked my truck in front of a crumbling brick apartment complex that looked like it had been condemned 10 years ago. A group of young men on the corner watched me eyeing the tools in the bed of my pickup, but I did not flinch. I walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man who has nothing left to lose. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to buy the truth. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the graffiti on the walls getting more aggressive with every landing. Apartment 4B. The door was peeling green paint, and I could hear the sound of a crying baby coming from inside. I knocked. Not a polite rap, but a solid thud that demanded attention. The crying stopped. I heard shuffling feet, then the slide of a deadbolt. The door cracked open 2 inches, held by a security chain. A dark eye peered out at me, wide with fear. "Martha," I said. "It is Harrison, Emily's father." The eye widened further. Then she tried to slam the door. "No, please go away," she whispered, her voice trembling. I jammed the toe of my work boot into the gap before the door could close. It was a rude move, something I would never normally do to a woman, but politeness was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Martha, please," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "I am not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to you. I need to know about Emily." "He will kill me," she hissed. "Mr. Derrick said if I talked to anyone he would call immigration. He said he would make sure I never work again. Please, Mr. Harrison. I have children." I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt. I pulled out a thick white envelope. It contained $2,000 in cash. It was money I had set aside for a new transmission for my truck, but transmissions can wait. My daughter could not. I held the envelope up to the crack in the door so she could see the thickness of it. "I know you are scared, Martha, and you have every right to be. He is a dangerous man, but he is not here right now. I am, and I can help you. There is enough in here to pay your rent for 3 months. I do not want you to testify in court. I do not want you to sign a paper. I just want you to tell me what happened in that house." She hesitated. Her eyes flicked from my face to the envelope, then back to my face. She saw the desperation in my eyes, a mirror of her own. Slowly the tension in the door released. The chain rattled as she unhooked it. The door creaked open. Martha looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. She was thin, her hands rough from scrubbing other people's floors. She ushered me in and quickly locked the door behind me. The apartment was tiny, smelling of boiled cabbage and bleach, but it was clean. "Sit," she said, pointing to a worn-out sofa. "I will not make tea. We do not have time." I sat on the edge of the cushion, the envelope still in my hand. I placed it on the coffee table between us. She didn't touch it, but she couldn't take her eyes off it. "Tell me about the sickness," I said. "The doctor says it is genetic. He says Emily lost her mind on her own." Martha let out a bitter, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. "Genetic," she scoffed. "Mrs. Emily was the smartest woman I knew. She ran that house. She managed the bills. She was happy, Mr. Harrison, until about 6 months ago." "What changed?" I asked. Martha leaned forward, lowering her voice as if Derrick might have microphones in the walls of this slum. "It started when she refused to sign the papers," Martha said. "Mr. Derrick brought home a stack of documents. He said it was for tax purposes, but Mrs. Emily read them. She told me in the kitchen that he was trying to mortgage the house to buy something called servers. She said no. She said she would not let him gamble away her father's hard work." My jaw tightened. I knew it. "They fought," Martha continued. "Screaming matches. He broke things. But she stood strong. She told him she was going to file for divorce. And then I prompted. Then came the nurse. Valerie." Martha spat the name out like it was poison. "Mr. Derrick said Mrs. Emily was too stressed and needed professional care." Valerie moved into the guest room. The next morning, Valerie started making the smoothies. "Smoothies," I repeated. Every morning, Martha said. "Green juice. Spinach, kale, fruit. Healthy," they said. But Valerie never let me touch the blender. She made it herself in the pantry with her back turned, and she made sure Mrs. Emily drank every drop. She would stand there and watch. And after she drank them, I asked, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Martha's eyes filled with tears. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Emily would get dizzy. She would slur her words. She would forget where she was. At first she tried to fight it. She told me the juice tasted bitter. But Mr. Derek told her she was imagining things. He told her she was having a breakdown. Gaslighting, I whispered, and poisoning. It got worse. Martha wiped her eyes with her apron. She started sleeping 18 hours a day. She stopped eating. And when she was awake, she was empty. Just like a shell. That is when Mr. Derek fired me. He said I was stealing silver. It was a lie. He just didn't want a witness. I nodded slowly. The puzzle pieces were locking together into a picture of pure evil. But there was one piece left, the one that haunted me. Martha, I said gently. When I saw Emily yesterday, she whispered something to me. She said, "Blueberry." Martha flinched. She physically recoiled, pressing her back against the sofa cushions. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. The room went silent except for the distant sound of traffic. "You know what it means," I said. "It wasn't fruit, was it?" Martha shook her head violently. "No. It was the dog. The little French bulldog. Mrs. Emily loved that dog more than anything. It was her baby before she could have babies." "I know," I said. "Derek told me it ran away." Martha closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "It did not run away, Mr. Harrison." She took a deep breath, shaking so hard the coffee table vibrated. It was the night Mrs. Emily said she was calling her lawyer. She was still strong then. She told Mr. Derek she was leaving him. Mr. Derek didn't hit her. He just smiled. He picked up the dog. Blueberry was sleeping on the rug. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists. "He took the dog to the balcony," Martha whispered. "It was the second floor." Mrs. Emily screamed. She begged him. She said she would sign anything. She said she would do anything. And I asked, my voice barely audible, "He dropped him." Martha sobbed. "He dropped poor Blueberry right off the balcony onto the patio stones." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But that wasn't enough for him," Martha continued, her voice cracking. "He made her go down and look. He made her look at the body. And he told her, 'If you ever try to leave me, if you ever call your father, this is what happens to things you love.'" The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "That is when she broke, Mr. Harrison," Martha whispered. "That is when the light went out in her eyes. It wasn't the drugs. It was the fear. She thinks if she speaks, you are next. She thinks he will do to you what he did to Blueberry." I sat there frozen. I had thought Derek was a thief. I had thought he was an abuser. But he was something much worse. He was a sadist. He had used psychological torture to shatter my daughter's soul. He had murdered an innocent animal just to prove a point. The heat of my anger, the burning rage I had felt since the party, suddenly vanished. It was replaced by something else. Something cold. Something absolute. It felt like liquid nitrogen pumping through my veins. Screaming wouldn't help. Punching him wouldn't help. A man like that didn't deserve a fight. He deserved an eradication. I stood up. I felt steady. I felt clear. "Thank you, Martha," I said. I pushed the envelope toward her. "Take this. Buy groceries for your kids. Change your locks." She looked up at me, terrified. "What are you going to do, Mr. Harrison? You cannot go to the police. It is her word against his, and she cannot speak. He will say she is hallucinating about the dog. He will say I am a disgruntled employee lying for money." "I know," I said. I adjusted my hat. "I am not going to the police. Not yet. The police need evidence. They need a crime scene." I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at her. "Derek likes to play games, Martha. He likes to break things. He thinks he is the only one who knows how to destroy a foundation. But he forgot who taught him how to build one." I unlocked the door. You won't hear from me for a few days, I said. But when you do, it will be safe to go back to work. I walked out into the graffitied hallway. I didn't hear the baby crying anymore. All I could hear was the sound of a dog whimpering in my mind and the sound of my daughter begging for mercy. Derek had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had turned this from a rescue mission into an execution. I walked down the stairs, past the drug dealers and the trash. I got into my truck. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were calm. I needed a lawyer, but not a nice one. I needed a shark. I needed someone who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped bury them. I started the engine. It was time to call Leo Katz. Leo Katz was the kind of lawyer you called when you did not want justice. You called Leo when you wanted revenge. He did not have an office in a glass tower with a view of the harbor. He worked out of the back of a nail salon in a strip mall, and his suits always smelled like stale tobacco and cheap cologne. But Leo had something the high-priced attorneys in their $3,000 suits did not have. He had a complete lack of moral boundaries and a hatred for bullies that matched my own. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, a place with flickering neon lights and menus sticky with syrup. It was the kind of place Derek would rather die than set foot in, which made it the perfect war room. I slid into the booth opposite Leo. He was already there, nursing a black coffee that looked like motor oil. He looked terrible. His tie was loose, his shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark bags under his eyes that looked like bruises. But when he looked up at me, his eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a shark smelling blood in the water. "You look like hell, Harrison." Leo grunted, not bothering with a hello. "I feel like hell," I replied. I ordered a coffee from the waitress, a woman who looked as tired as I felt. "Did you find it?" Leo reached into his briefcase, a battered leather thing that looked like it had survived a war zone. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and slapped them onto the Formica table. The sound made the silverware rattle. "I did not just find it, Harry. I performed an autopsy on your son-in-law's finances. And let me tell you, the corpse is rotting." He opened the file. It was a chaotic mess of spreadsheets, bank statements, and printouts from offshore accounts. Leo tapped the top page with a yellow, stained finger. "Derek is not rich," Leo said, his voice a low growl. "He is a magician. It is all smoke and mirrors. He has been leveraging the house, the cars, even the furniture to cover his losses." "Losses from what?" I asked. Leo flipped the page. "Crypto," he said, spitting the word out like a curse. "Your boy thinks he is the Wolf of Wall Street. He put $15 million into speculative coins. Not Bitcoin, not Ethereum. Garbage. Pump and dump schemes run by teenagers in basements." I stared at the numbers. Red ink everywhere. Negative balances. Overdraft fees. 15 million, I whispered. "That is almost everything Sarah and I saved. That is Emily's future." "It is gone," Leo said brutally. "Vaporized into the digital ether." But that is not the worst part. He pulled out another document. This one looked official. It had the seal of the trust fund I had set up for Emily 10 years ago. "He is desperate, Harry. He has burned through the liquid cash. He has maxed out the credit lines. The sharks are circling. I found emails from some very scary people demanding repayment for loans he took out to cover his margin calls. He needs money, and he needs it yesterday. And there is only one pot of gold left, I realized." "Exactly." Leo nodded. "The principle of the trust. There is $10 million sitting in a secured account. It is the safety net you built for Emily. Derek has been trying to crack it for months. That is why he got the conservatorship. He thought if he had legal control over Emily, he could drain the account." "But he can't," I said, remembering the clauses I had insisted on. Leo grinned, revealing teeth stained by coffee. "Because you are a paranoid old bastard, And for once, that pays off. The trust has a safety valve. In the event of incapacitation, the spouse cannot access the principal without the co-signature of the original grantor. Me, I said. You, Leo, confirmed. He cannot touch that 10 million without your signature. And he knows it. That is why he hasn't killed her yet, Harry. She is his ticket to the money, but he is running out of time. The loan sharks are not going to wait for probate court. He needs you to sign that release, and he needs you to do it now. I sat back, the plastic booth squeaking beneath me. This explained everything. The servers in the basement were probably a desperate attempt to mine his way out of debt. The cheap wine mixed with the expensive bottles. The lack of medical care for Emily. He was bleeding money. So what is the play, I asked. Do we take this to the judge? Do we show him the losses and get the conservatorship revoked? Leo shook his head violently. No. Too slow. A forensic audit takes months. Derek has expensive lawyers who will delay, obfuscate, and file motions until the sun burns out. By the time a judge actually looks at these papers, Derek will have found another way to get that money, or he will have fled the country. Or worse, he will realize Emily is a liability and arrange a tragic accident. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The image of the dog falling from the balcony flashed in my mind. So what do we do? I asked. Leo leaned in across the table. His voice dropped to a whisper. We do not fight him in court. We fight him in his head. We need him to think he has won. We need him to get sloppy. He pulled a pen out of his pocket and drew a circle on a napkin. Derek is arrogant, Leo said. He thinks you are a senile, emotional old construction worker. He thinks he can bully you, but he also needs you. So we are going to give him what he wants. I frowned. You want me to sign? Leo shook his head. No. I want you to dangle the signature. I want you to be the carrot. You are going to call him. You are going to apologize for the scene at the party. You are going to tell him that the stress was too much for you. You are going to tell him that your doctor found an irregularities or... Oh, her heart. I raised an eyebrow. My heart is fine. I can bench press 200 pounds. Derek doesn't know that Leo smiled wickedly. You are going to play the dying man, Harry. You are going to tell him that you want to make peace before you go. You are going to tell him that you want to transfer the trust management to him so he can take care of Emily when you are gone. I hated the idea. Every fiber of my being wanted to strangle Derek, not surrender to him. I was a fighter. I was a builder. I didn't play victims. I have to look weak, I said, tasting the bitterness of the words. You have to look harmless, Leo corrected. You have to be the Trojan horse. We need to get inside that house, Harry. Not for 5 minutes. Not as a guest. We need you in there with free rein. If he thinks you are signing over the money, he will invite you in. He will roll out the red carpet. He will let his guard down because he will be too busy counting his chickens. And once I am inside, I asked. Leo's eyes went cold. Once you are inside, you plant the evidence. You get the confession. You find the servers. You find the drugs. You get everything we need to bury him so deep he will never see the sun again. But to do that, you have to swallow your pride. You have to let him insult you. You have to let him gloat. Can you do that? I looked at my hands. They were scarred and calloused. Hands that had built skyscrapers and bridges. Hands that had held my daughter when she was a baby. For Emily, I would do anything. I would crawl through broken glass. I would let a man like Derek spit in my face if it meant I could break his jaw later. I thought about Emily in that wheelchair whispering the name of her dead dog. I thought about the fear in her eyes. She was acting to survive. She was trapping herself inside her own mind to escape him. If she could do it, so could I. I picked up the cold coffee and downed it in one gulp. Make the papers look real, I told Leo. Make them look like a total surrender. I want him to drool when he sees them. Leo grinned, and for the first time he looked genuinely happy. I will draft a power of attorney transfer that looks so good he will want to frame it. But inside the fine print, I will bury a clause that gives us a 24-hour revocation window, just in case things go south. There is no just in case, I said, sliding out of the booth. I am going to end him, Leo. I am going to take his house, his money, and his freedom. And when I am done, I am going to buy this diner and turn it into a 5-star restaurant just to spite him. Leo laughed, a dry, raspy sound. Go get him, old man. And Harry? I paused. Try to look a little more gray, Leo said. You look like you are ready to punch a wall. You need to look like you are ready to nap. I nodded. I walked out of the diner and into the bright sunlight. I slumped my shoulders. I dragged my feet. I practiced the cough of a dying man. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. The stage was set. The script was written. And the villain was waiting in his castle, unaware that the old peasant approaching the gate was carrying a sword under his cloak. I reached for my phone and dialed Derek's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. I took a deep breath, letting the anger settle into a cold, hard pit in my stomach. Showtime. I rented a room at the Holiday Inn near the interstate. It was a calculated choice. It was clean enough to be respectable, but sad enough to smell like defeat. I needed the stage to be perfect for the performance of a lifetime. I pulled the curtains tight, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight. I stripped down to my undershirt and boxers, then messed up the sheets to make it look like I had been tossing and turning for days. I even did 50 push-ups right next to the bed, not to exercise, but to make my heart rate spike and a sheen of sweat appear on my forehead. I needed to look like a man whose body was failing him. I needed to look like a man who was afraid of the dark. When I heard the knock on the door, I didn't answer immediately. I let him wait. I let him stand in the hallway and wonder if the old man had finally kicked the bucket. After the third impatient pound on the wood, I called out, my voice deliberately thin and reedy. "Come in," I wheezed. "It is unlocked." The door swung open and Derek stepped inside. He looked like a diamond in a dumpster. He was wearing a navy blue bespoke suit, a silk tie, and that arrogant sneer that was permanently etched onto his face. He scanned the room, his nose wrinkling at the smell of stale air conditioning and fast food wrappers I had scattered around the trash can. "Jesus, Harrison," Derek said, leaving the door slightly ajar, as if he needed an escape route. "You look terrible." I sat up slowly, clutching my chest with a trembling hand. "I am not doing so well, Derek," I said, letting a cough rattle in my chest. "The doctor says it is my heart. Angina. Stress. He says I am a ticking time bomb." Derek did not rush to my side. He did not ask if I needed water. He stood at the foot of the bed, keeping a safe distance like a visitor at a zoo looking at a sick gorilla. "So why did you call me?" he asked, checking his watch. "I have a meeting in an hour." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I called you because I am tired, Derek. I am tired of fighting. I spent all night thinking about what you said. About Emily. About the house." I paused, letting him lean in. I saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. He smelled blood. "You were right," I lied. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I am just a stubborn old man. I do not understand how the world works anymore. I tried to protect Emily, but maybe I am just holding her back. Maybe I am the problem." Derek's posture relaxed. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and took a step closer. The sneer softened into a look of pitying condescension. "It takes a big man to admit that, Harrison," he said smoothly. "I have always said you mean well. You are just outdated." I nodded, staring at my hands. "I do not want to die fighting my family. I want to make things right. I want to ensure Emily is taken care of before I go." I reached for the nightstand, my hand shaking violently. I knocked over a bottle of pills, just vitamins, but he didn't know that before grabbing the manila envelope Leo had prepared. I want you to take over, I said, holding the envelope out to him. This is the transfer of management for my construction company. The equipment, the contracts, the land. It is all there. I cannot run it anymore. My heart cannot take the stress. I want you to sell it or manage it, whatever you think is best. Just use the money to take care of Emily. Derek's eyes widened. He knew the value of my company. It wasn't a Fortune 500 corporation, but I had millions in heavy machinery and prime real estate. To a man drowning in debt, this was a life preserver made of solid gold. He snatched the envelope from my hand. He didn't even try to be polite about it. He ripped it open and pulled out the documents. I watched him scan the pages. Leo had done a masterful job. The top page was a standard transfer of assets. It looked like a total surrender. It looked like I was handing him the keys to the kingdom. But Derek was so blinded by greed, he didn't read the fine print on page 4. He didn't see the clause that defined this as a temporary stewardship subject to a competency review of the grantor me within 48 hours. He didn't see that by signing this, he was legally acknowledging a fiduciary duty to me, which meant I could audit his entire financial life if he mismanaged a single cent. This is generous. Derek said, his voice trying to sound neutral, but I could hear the excitement trembling underneath. You are making the right decision, Harrison. I can modernize the business. I can liquidate the outdated assets and invest in high-yield portfolios. I am sure you can, I whispered. Just sign it, Derek. Take the burden off my shoulders. Please. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his pocket. He didn't hesitate. He didn't say, let me have my lawyer look at this. He was like a starving man presented with a steak. He scribbled his signature on the dotted line. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. He finished signing and looked up at me, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Done, he said, tapping the paper. You can rest now, old man. I will take it from here. He tucked the documents into his inside pocket close to his heart, or where his heart would be if he had one. I sank back onto the pillows, letting out a long exhale. Thank you, I said. There is just one more thing. What is it? Derek asked, already turning toward the door. I want to see her, I said. I want to see Emily. If this is the end for me, I want to see my daughter one last time. As a family. Derek paused. He tapped his chin, calculating. Now that he had my company, now that he thought I was dying and compliant, I was no longer a threat. I was just a pathetic loose end to be tied up. We are having a gala this Saturday, he said. A fundraiser for the foundation. It will be at the house. Very high profile. The governor might be there. He looked at me, scanning my undershirt. If you can clean yourself up and if you promise to behave, you can come. I will bring Emily down. We can take a family photo. It will look good for the press. A family photo. That was all we were to him. A prop for his public image. I will be there, I promised. I will be on my best behavior. Good, Derek said. He opened the door. Get some rest, Harrison. You look like you have one foot in the grave. He walked out, whistling a cheerful tune. The door clicked shut. I lay there for a full minute, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I waited until I heard the elevator ding. Then I threw off the covers. I sat up on the edge of the bed. My breathing was steady. My hands were rock steady. The heart attack was gone. The weakness was gone. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the old man staring back at me. I didn't see a victim. I saw a soldier who had just successfully infiltrated enemy lines. He signed it, I told my reflection. He actually signed it. By accepting management of my company, Derek had just unknowingly given my forensic accountants legal access to his own accounts to verify commingling of funds. Leo was going to have a field day. But that was just the paperwork. The real prize was the invitation. Saturday. The gala. He was going to parade Emily out like a show pony. He was going to use her to solicit donations from the wealthy elite. He didn't know that I wasn't coming to take a photo. I was coming to take the house apart. I reached for my phone and dialed Leo. He took the bait, I said as soon as he answered. I am in Saturday night. Excellent, Leo's voice crackled on the other end. I will have the team ready. But Harry, you need to get the physical evidence. The papers are good, but we need the servers. We need the drugs. I know, I said, pulling on my work boots. I looked at the empty spot on the floor where Derek had stood. He thought he was the king of the jungle. He didn't realize that the Trojan horse had just rolled through his gates, and inside that horse wasn't just a lawyer. It was a father with a sledgehammer. I grabbed my jacket. I had 3 days to prepare. I had to buy a tuxedo. I had to buy a spy camera. And I had to figure out how to switch Emily's medication without anyone noticing. The dying man act was over. It was time for the resurrection. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was the day of the gala, the day Derek planned to parade my daughter around like a trophy to squeeze donations out of his rich friends. But for me, it was D-Day. I had spent 40 years in construction, and if there is one thing I know, it is that every building has a service entrance, every fortress has a ventilation shaft, and every arrogant man has a blind spot the size of a barn door. Derek was gone. My source at the country club confirmed he had an appointment at 10 o'clock with an exclusive tailor downtown. He needed his tuxedo to be perfect. He needed to look like the savior of the poor he claimed to be. His vanity was my window of opportunity. I did not hire a team of elite spies. I hired men I could trust with my life. Mike and Sal, 2 master electricians who had worked for me since the 90s. They didn't ask questions. When I told them I needed to rewire a house and install some special equipment off the books, they just packed their vans. I pulled on a gray jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. It was stained with oil and smelled of copper wire. I pulled a dirty baseball cap low over my eyes and grabbed a heavy tool belt. I wasn't Harrison, the father-in-law. I was just another faceless, invisible worker. We rolled up to the service gate in a white van marked Metro Electric. The guard checked the clipboard. Derek, in his obsession with perfection, had indeed authorized a last-minute check of the electrical load for the party. He was terrified of a blackout ruining his big night. He just didn't know that the electricians coming to prevent a blackout were the ones who were going to turn the lights on his crimes. We were in. The house was buzzing with activity. Caterers were setting up tables in the garden. Florists were carrying massive bouquets of white lilies that smelled like a funeral home. Nobody looked at us. We were part of the scenery. We were the help. Mike went to the main ballroom. He set up a ladder under the massive crystal chandelier. While pretending to check the bulbs, he embedded a camera the size of a pinhead into the crystal. It would give us a bird's-eye view of the entire party. It would capture every handshake, every fake smile, and hopefully the moment Derek's world fell apart. Sal went to the basement. His job was the most dangerous. He had to get near the server room. He had to plant a listening device right next to those humming black boxes. We needed to hear the fans. We needed to hear the power consumption. We needed proof that Derek was running an industrial operation in a residential zone. I took the upstairs. My heart was hammering against my ribs loud enough that I was sure the caterers could hear it. I walked up the back stairs, my tool belt clanking softly. I kept my head down. I gripped a voltage meter in my hand like a weapon. The hallway was empty. I moved quickly to the master bedroom. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it gently behind me. The room was cold. It smelled of Derek's expensive cologne, a scent that made my skin crawl. I didn't have time to hate him. I had 2 minutes. I went straight to the nightstand on Emily's side of the bed. There it was, an orange prescription bottle. I picked it up. The label read Dr. Aris. The drug name was a long string of letters I didn't need to pronounce to know it was poison. This was the chemical leash that kept my daughter docile. This was the liquid fog that made her forget her own name. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an identical orange bottle. I had spent the last 2 days preparing this. Inside were vitamins. Harmless water-soluble vitamins that looked exactly like the sedatives. I opened Derek's bottle. I dumped the pills into a Ziploc bag in my pocket to keep as evidence. Then I poured the vitamins into the prescription bottle. My hands were shaking. If I dropped one, if I left a trace, it was over. I screwed the cap back on. I placed the bottle back on the coaster exactly where I found it. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of real hope. Tonight, when they forced her to take her medicine before the party, she wouldn't be swallowing poison. She would be swallowing clarity. It wouldn't happen instantly, but by the time the party started, the fog would begin to lift. She would be awake. She would be ready. I turned to leave. I needed to install one more camera in the vent above the bed. I needed to catch them in the act. I stepped onto the chair and reached for the vent cover. Click, clack. The sound of high heels on the hardwood floor outside the door froze my blood. They were coming fast, aggressive. I couldn't hide. There was no closet near enough. There was no time to get under the bed. The door handle turned. I stayed on the chair. I turned my back to the door and jammed my screwdriver into the vent, making a loud scraping noise. The door opened. "Who is in here?" a voice snapped. It was Valerie. I didn't turn around immediately. I kept screwing the screw that didn't need screwing. "I said, who is in here?" she demanded, stepping into the room. I slowly climbed down from the chair. I kept my hat pulled low. I hunched my shoulders, trying to look smaller, older. I turned around, keeping my eyes on her shoes. "Just the electrician, ma'am," I mumbled, affecting a rough, gravelly voice. "The boss said to check the outlets in the master bedroom. Said the load from the party lights might trip the breaker up here." Valerie stood there, hands on her hips. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight, ready for the party. She scanned me, her eyes narrowing. I held my breath. If she looked at my hands, she might recognize the ring I had worn for 30 years. I quickly shoved them into my pockets. "I didn't authorize anyone upstairs," she said, her voice suspicious. I shrugged. "Check the work order, lady. I just do what I am told. You want the power to go out while you are drying your hair, that is on you." I moved to step past her. It was a gamble. If I acted like I didn't care, like I was just a grumpy old worker who wanted to go home, maybe she wouldn't look too closely. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Wait," she said. My hand tightened around the screwdriver in my pocket. She leaned in, sniffing the air. "You smell like grease." "I work with machines, ma'am," I said. She stared at my face. I could feel her eyes boring into the shadow beneath the brim of my hat. 1 second. 2 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. Then she scoffed. "Well, get out. And take your smell with you. This room is off limits." She stepped aside, dismissing me as if I were a stray dog. "Yes, ma'am," I grunted. I walked past her. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked into the hallway and toward the back stairs. I heard her walk into the room. I heard the sound of a drawer opening. Then I heard her voice muttering to herself. "Where is my damn phone?" Ah, there it is. She had come back for her phone. If I had been 10 seconds slower, she would have walked in while I was holding the pills. I reached the bottom of the stairs. Mike and Sal were waiting by the back door. They looked tense. They had seen Valerie come in. "Done," Mike whispered. "Done," I confirmed. We walked out to the van. The sun was high in the sky now. The caterers were laying out white tablecloths. The band was setting up on the stage. We drove out of the gate past the security guard who didn't even look up from his phone. As soon as we were down the road, I pulled the Ziploc bag of pills out of my pocket. I looked at them. The weapon Derek had used to silence my daughter was now in my hands. And back in that room, sitting on that nightstand, was the cure. I looked at the monitor Sal had set up in the back of the van. The screens flickered to life. Camera 1. The ballroom. Crystal clear. Camera 2. The basement. The green lights of the servers blinking in the dark. Camera 3. The bedroom. I saw Valerie sitting on the bed checking her makeup in the mirror. She reached out and moved the pill bottle slightly to the left. She didn't know. I leaned back against the wall of the van and let out a laugh that was half relief, half adrenaline. "The trap is set," I said to the empty road. Tonight I wasn't just going to a party. I was going to a demolition. Derek wanted a show. He wanted drama. He wanted the spotlight. Well, I was going to give him all of that. I was going to give him a performance that would bring the house down. I checked my watch. 6 hours until the gala. 6 hours until the medicine kicked in. 6 hours until Emily woke up from her nightmare. I closed my eyes. "Hang on, baby. Just hang on. Daddy is coming, and this time I am not leaving until the monsters are gone." I sat in the back of the surveillance van for 48 hours straight. My world had shrunk down to 3 glowing monitors and the smell of stale coffee. My back ached, my eyes burned, and my muscles were coiled tight like rusted springs. But I could not look away. I could not blink. Because on that center screen a miracle was happening in slow motion. For months my daughter Emily had been drowning in a chemical ocean. Derek and his paid-off doctor had kept her submerged, her mind drifting in a fog of sedatives and fear. But for the last 2 days, thanks to a sleight of hand and a bottle of cheap vitamins, the tide was finally going out. I watched her sleep on the second night. It was different. It wasn't the comatose, heavy slumber of the drugged. She was tossing and turning. She was dreaming. And when the morning sun of the gala day cut through the sheer curtains, she didn't just stare at the ceiling. She sat up. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. She looked at her hands. She flexed her fingers. She touched her face. It was the movement of someone discovering they are alive after a long hibernation. The vacancy was gone from her eyes. The pupils were normal. She looked around the room, not with confusion, but with a sharp, terrified clarity. She remembered. She remembered the dog. She remembered the abuse. And she realized she was trapped. Then she did exactly what I hoped she would do. She reached under her pillow. When I had swapped the pills, I had left a small folded piece of paper inside the pillowcase. It was a risk. If Valerie had found it while changing the sheets, the game would have been over. But Valerie was lazy. She hadn't changed the sheets in days. On the screen, I saw Emily pull out the note. Her hands were trembling. She unfolded it. I knew exactly what it said because I had written it with a shaking hand myself. "Daddy is here. I am watching. Do not let them know you are awake. Keep acting. Tonight, we end this." I saw her read it. I saw her read it again. And then she pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Her shoulders shook. She was crying. But they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The cavalry had arrived, and the cavalry was her father. She quickly hid the note inside her bra. She wiped her face. She took a deep breath, and then she slumped her shoulders. She let her jaw go slack. She unfocused her eyes. In the blink of an eye, she transformed back into the broken doll Derek wanted her to be. My girl. She was a fighter. She was acting for her life. Suddenly, the door to the bedroom flew open. Derek stormed in. He was half-dressed for the gala, wearing black tuxedo trousers and a crisp white shirt, but his bow tie was undone, hanging around his neck. He looked stressed. He was pacing, talking loudly into his phone. "I do not care what the bank says," he shouted into the phone. "The transfer happens on Monday. I have the old man's signature. The funds are secured. Just keep the creditors off my back for 24 more hours." He hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. It bounced and landed right next to Emily's leg. She didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead at the wall, maintaining the act. Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. He walked over to the mirror to adjust his collar. He looked at himself, practicing a smile. It was sickening to watch. He was putting on his mask for the world, getting ready to play the grieving, devoted husband one last time. He turned to look at Emily. "Get up," he barked. "Valerie is coming to get you dressed. And try not to drool on the dress this time. This is a $5,000 gown." Emily didn't move. She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring. But then she made a mistake. A tiny human mistake. As Derek turned away to grab his jacket, Emily's eyes shifted. She looked at him, not past him, at him. And in that split second, the hatred she felt must have broken through the facade. It was a look of pure, concentrated venom. Derek froze. He had seen it in the mirror. He spun around slowly. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He walked back to the bed. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "What did you look at?" he whispered. Emily stayed silent. She tried to glaze her eyes over again, but it was too late. He had seen the spark. "You are in there, aren't you?" Derek hissed. "The drugs. They are wearing off." He grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her cheeks. He forced her to look at him. "Do not look at me like that, you useless cow. Do not look at me with judgment. You think you are better than me. You think because your daddy has money and you have a degree that you are special. You are nothing." Emily didn't blink. She held his gaze. She didn't speak, but her eyes screamed defiance. And then he snapped. His hand lashed out. A sharp, brutal slap across her face. The sound came through the audio feed in the van like a gunshot. I flinched. My body reacted before my brain could stop it. My hand, which was holding a styrofoam cup of water, clenched shut. The cup exploded. Water sprayed over the console, but I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel anything but a red-hot rage that threatened to burn me alive from the inside out. I watched my daughter's head snap to the side. A red mark bloomed instantly on her pale cheek. She didn't cry out. She just took it. Derek stood up, breathing hard. He straightened his cuffs. "You want to wake up," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Good. Be awake for this." He walked to the window and looked out at the party set up below. "Enjoy tonight, Emily. Smile for the cameras. Shake hands with the governor, because this is your farewell tour." He turned back to her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Once the bank clears the transfer on Monday, once I have your father's money in my offshore account, I won't need a wife anymore. And I certainly won't need a vegetable." He walked to the door, opening it. "Widowers get a lot of sympathy, Emily, especially when their mentally unstable wives succumb to their illness. Maybe you will slip in the bath. Maybe you will mix up your pills. I haven't decided yet. But either way, by Tuesday, I will be a grieving single man with $30 million, and you will be a tragedy on the evening news." He slammed the door shut. The silence returned to the room. I sat there in the van, water dripping from my hand onto the floor. I was shaking. Not from fear, but from the effort it took not to run out of that van, charge up the hill, and tear his throat out with my bare teeth. I looked at the screen. Emily slowly turned her head back. She touched her cheek where he had hit her. Then she looked up. She looked right at the vent where I had hidden the camera. She didn't know exactly where the lens was, but she knew I was watching. She knew I had heard it. She nodded. A single small nod. It wasn't a nod of defeat. It was a nod of permission. She was telling me she could handle the pain. She was telling me to stick to the plan. She was telling me to wait for the kill shot. I grabbed a towel and wiped the water off the console. My movements were robotic, cold, calculated. He had just signed his own death warrant. He had confessed. He had threatened murder. And I had it all on tape. But tape wasn't enough. I needed to destroy him in front of his audience. I needed to strip him of his reputation, his pride, and his freedom all at once. I checked my watch. 4 hours until the guests arrived. I reached for the microphone that connected to Mike and Sal's earpieces. "He just threatened to kill her," I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. I heard Mike gasp on the other end. "Boss, do we move in?" "No," I said. "We wait. We stick to the timeline." "But Mike..." "Yeah, boss. Disable the backup generator," I ordered. "But if the power goes out..." Mike started. "When the power goes out, I cut him off. I want the house dark. I want him to panic. And then I want to be the one who turns the lights back on." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the image of my daughter. "You are going to be a widower, all right, Derek," I whispered. "But not the kind with money. You are going to be the kind that rots in a cell, wondering where it all went wrong." I started checking my equipment. I put on my tuxedo. It was an old suit, one I hadn't worn since Emily's wedding. It was a bit tight in the shoulders, but it fit. I looked in the mirror of the van. The man staring back wasn't a construction worker. He wasn't a victim. He was the executioner. And the gallows were ready. The garden of the Greenwich estate had been transformed into a theater of lies. Derek had spared no expense to set the stage for his final act of deception. Thousands of white lilies had been imported, filling the humid night air with a scent that was overwhelming, almost suffocating. To the guests, it smelled like luxury. To me, it smelled like a funeral parlor. Crystal chandeliers had been strung from the ancient oak trees, casting a soft golden glow over the manicured lawn. Waiters in white gloves moved like silent ghosts through the crowd, offering champagne on silver trays to men who destroyed economies for a living, and women who wore the GDP of a small nation around their necks. I stood near the periphery of the gala, hidden in the shadows of a large hedge. My tuxedo, purchased from a thrift store 2 days ago, smelled faintly of mothballs, which added a nice touch of authenticity to my performance. I leaned heavily on my cane, hunched over, making myself look smaller, frailer. I was no longer Harrison the builder. I was Harrison the relic. A dusty, broken old man who was just another prop in Derek's grand production. The guests were a who is who of the city's moral vacuum. I recognized a banker who had been investigated for fraud twice but never charged. I saw a politician who campaigned on family values while keeping 2 mistresses in the city. They were laughing, drinking, and congratulating each other on their own importance. They were the perfect audience for Derek. They understood the language of superficiality. They didn't care about the truth. They only cared about the presentation. Suddenly, the string quartet fell silent. The chatter died down as a spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the French doors at the top of the terrace stairs. The moment had arrived. Derek stepped out. He looked every inch the grieving hero. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, hugging his frame in a way that suggested power and control. But he wasn't alone. He was pushing a wheelchair. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at my daughter. Emily. They had dressed her in a shimmering silver gown that caught the light, making her look like a statue cast in precious metal. Her hair had been styled in elaborate waves, and her face was painted with enough makeup to hide a bruise, but they couldn't hide the truth from a father. Her cheeks were hollow. Her arms, resting limply in her lap, were too thin. She looked like a beautiful broken doll that Derek had pulled out of a box for show and tell. A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. I heard a woman near me whisper, "So tragic." She was so vibrant. Her companion replied, "Derek is a saint for staying with her. Most men would have put her in a home by now." I gripped the handle of my cane until my knuckles turned white. If only they knew. If only they knew that the saint was the one who had drained the life out of her drop by poison drop. Derek paused at the top of the stairs, soaking in the attention. He looked down at Emily with a gaze that was practiced, rehearsed, in front of a mirror 1,000 times. He reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It was a gesture of intimacy that made my stomach turn. He wasn't touching his wife. He was adjusting his asset. He began to push the wheelchair down the ramp that had been specially installed for tonight. He moved slowly, solemnly, ensuring that every camera, every eye captured the image of his devotion. He wheeled her onto the low stage set up in the center of the garden. He locked the brakes on the wheelchair, trapping her in the spotlight. Then he took the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," Derek began. His voice was thick with emotion, trembling just enough to be convincing. "Tonight is about the foundation, yes. But for me tonight is about something much deeper. It is about promises." He looked down at Emily. She stared blankly at her lap, her face devoid of expression. She was playing her part perfectly. The drugs were gone from her system, but the mask remained. "When I married Emily," Derek continued, looking out at the crowd with wet, shining eyes, "I promised to love her in sickness and in health. I didn't know the sickness would come so soon. I didn't know it would take so much. Watching the brilliant, funny, vibrant woman I love fade into the shadows of her own mind has been the greatest pain of my life." He paused. He wiped a non-existent tear from his cheek. The crowd was eating it up. I saw handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes. "But love is not about convenience," he said, his voice rising with passion. "Love is about sacrifice. It is about staying when everyone else tells you to leave. It is about being the anchor in the storm." I wanted to vomit. The audacity of this man. He was standing there preaching about sacrifice while his mistress was likely watching from an upstairs window while his bank accounts were waiting for the influx of stolen money. He was weaponizing my daughter's suffering to polish his own ego. "I could not have done this alone," Derek said, shifting his tone to one of humble gratitude. "I have had support. And tonight I want to honor a man who has made a very difficult, very brave decision." The spotlight swung around. It swept over the crowd, searching until it blinded me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek announced, "my father-in-law, Harrison." The crowd turned. Hundreds of eyes landed on the old man in the cheap tuxedo. I blinked in the harsh light, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning confusion. "Harrison," Derek beckoned, waving me forward. "Please, come up here, join us." This was it. The transfer of power. The public legitimization of his theft. I began the long walk to the stage. I didn't rush. I shuffled. I dragged my left foot slightly. Tap, shuffle, tap, shuffle. The sound of my cane on the stone path was a rhythmic countdown to his destruction. As I passed through the sea of guests, they parted like the Red Sea. I felt their pity washing over me. "Poor old man," their eyes said. "He is past his prime. He is giving up." I reached the steps of the stage. Derek hurried down to help me, gripping my elbow with a firm, patronizing hand. "Careful, Dad," he whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I've got you." He guided me up the stairs and positioned me next to the wheelchair. I was now standing beside the predator and his prey. I looked down at Emily. She didn't look up, but I saw her index finger tap the armrest of the wheelchair. Once. Twice. She was ready. Derek put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a side hug that felt like the embrace of a python. "Harrison has decided to officially step down from managing the family trust and the construction business," Derek announced to the room. "He is handing the reins over to me so that he can rest and so that I can ensure Emily has the best care money can buy." A round of applause broke out. It was polite affirmative. The sharks were applauding the acquisition. "I accept this responsibility with humility," Derek beamed. I promise you, Harrison, I will take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. He turned to me, offering the microphone with a smug, triumphant smile. Would you like to say a few words? I looked at the microphone. I looked at his face glowing with the arrogance of a man who thinks he has won. I took the microphone. My hand shook, but not from age. It shook from the effort of holding back the hurricane inside me. I looked out at the silent garden. The air was thick, heavy, and nauseatingly fake. It was the perfect atmosphere for a revelation. Thank you, Derek, I wheezed into the mic. You are right. It is time for a change. Derek nodded encouragingly, waiting for his validation. But the old man was about to leave the building, and the father was about to take the stage. I held the microphone with a grip that turned my knuckles white. Derek was still smiling, that plastic rehearsed grin of a man who believes he has manipulated the world into submission. He nodded at me, expecting a eulogy for my own independence, expecting me to surrender the last of my dignity. The garden was silent, waiting for the old man to speak. I looked out at the sea of faces. The bankers, the politicians, the socialites. They were all watching, glass of champagne in hand, ready to applaud the transfer of wealth. They thought they were witnessing a business transaction. They did not know they were about to witness a demolition. Before I signed these papers, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the garden speakers, I think it is important for everyone here to know exactly what they are investing in. Derek has told you a beautiful story tonight, a story about love, a story about sacrifice. But as a builder, I know that sometimes a fresh coat of paint is just there to hide the rot in the walls. Derek's smile faltered. He took a half step toward me. Harrison, he whispered, what are you doing? I ignored him. I pointed a shaking finger at the massive LED screen behind us, the one that had been displaying heartwarming photos of the charity. I have prepared a short film, I announced. Let us call it a behind-the-scenes look at the true nature of my son-in-law. I signaled to the tech booth. Mike and Sal, sitting in their van miles away, hit the enter key. The screen flickered. The smiling photos vanished. The garden was suddenly bathed in the harsh blue light of a security camera feed. The first video began to play. It was the master bedroom. My daughter's sanctuary. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago. The crowd gasped as they saw Derek and Valerie, the nurse, tumbling onto the bed. They were laughing, drunk on expensive wine and cruelty. The audio was crystal clear. She is such a burden, Derek's voice rang out, filling the garden. I cannot wait until we dump her in the state facility. I am going to turn this room into a gym. Valerie giggled, tracing a finger down his chest. And what about the old man? Derek laughed, a cold, ugly sound. The old man is a fool. He will sign everything over and then he can drop dead for all I care. The silence in the garden was shattered. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the guests. Derek turned pale. He looked at the screen, then at me, his eyes wide with panic. Stop this, he hissed. It is a fake. He is senile. But the video changed. The second clip was even worse. It was the kitchen. Derek was standing over a bowl of soup. He looked around furtively, then leaned down and spit a thick glob of saliva into the broth. He stirred it in a twisted smile on his face. The camera followed him as he walked into the living room and forced the spoon into Emily's mouth, cooing at her with fake affection. A woman in the front row screamed. The polite facade of the gala crumbled instantly. People were turning away in disgust. The image of their golden boy, their philanthropist spitting into his disabled wife's food, was too visceral, too vile to ignore. But I wasn't done. The final clip played. It was from this very morning. Derek stood in the bedroom fixing his tie. He looked at Emily in the wheelchair. You are going to be a widower, all right, Derek's recorded voice sneered. Maybe you will slip in the bath. Maybe you will mix up your pills. I haven't decided yet. But by Tuesday, I will be a rich, single man. The video froze on his face, twisted in a mask of pure malice. The garden erupted. It wasn't just shock anymore. It was outrage. I heard shouts. Someone yelled for the police. The guests were backing away from the stage as if it were radioactive. Derek stood there, stripped naked in front of the world. His reputation was incinerated. His freedom was gone. He looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting frantically from the screen to the angry crowd. Then he looked at me. He saw the source of his destruction. He saw the old man he had underestimated, and the fear in his eyes turned to a primal, murderous rage. "I will kill you," he shrieked. He didn't think. He reacted. He lunged across the stage, his hands reaching for my throat. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to crush the life out of me right there in front of everyone. I watched him come. I didn't flinch. I opened my hand and let the cane fall. It hit the wooden stage with a hollow clatter. I didn't need it. I never needed it. I planted my feet. My work boots gripped the floorboards. I straightened my back, shedding the years, shedding the weakness. I wasn't a frail senior citizen. I was a man who had moved tons of concrete with his bare hands. Derek was fast, but he was sloppy. He swung wildly. I stepped inside his guard. I rotated my hips, driving power up from the ground, through my legs, through my core, and into my right shoulder. I threw an uppercut. It was a punch forged in 40 years of hard labor. It was a bricklayer's punch, solid, unyielding. My fist connected with the point of his jaw. There was a sickening crunch, the sound of bones snapping under pressure. Derek's head snapped back. His feet actually left the ground. A spray of blood and a white tooth flew into the spotlight. He crashed onto the stage floor, flat on his back. He didn't move. He just lay there, wheezing, clutching his shattered face, blood pouring through his fingers onto his pristine tuxedo shirt. The crowd went deathly silent. They stared at the old man, who was standing tall, fists clenched, chest heaving. I walked over to him. I loomed over his broken body. I looked at his Italian leather shoes, the same shoes he had used to step on my daughter. I reached down and grabbed the microphone. I brought it close to my lips, my voice a low, dangerous growl that shook the very air. "You like wiping your shoes on people, don't you, Derek?" He moaned, spitting blood. I pointed to the floorboards inches from his face. "Well, you are down there now. So go ahead." I leaned in, my eyes burning into his. "Lick the floor." The blue lights of the police cruisers washed over the garden, cutting through the shadows and the expensive mood lighting. It was over. The wail of the sirens drowned out the murmurs of the stunned guests as uniformed officers swarmed the stage. I stepped back, giving them space to do their job. I watched as they hauled Derek to his feet. He was still spitting blood, his jaw hanging at a sickening angle. He tried to shout orders, tried to pull rank, but the officers didn't care about his bank account or his tuxedo. They slammed him against the podium, twisting his arms behind his back until the handcuffs clicked shut. Valerie tried to blend into the crowd, shedding her nurse persona for one of a terrified bystander, but Leo Katz stepped out from behind a hedge flanked by 2 detectives. He pointed a finger at her, and that was it. She was in cuffs before she could take 3 steps. As they dragged her past the stage, she started screaming, blaming Derek for everything, claiming she was just following orders. It is funny how quickly rats turn on each other when the ship starts to sink. Derek was being led away, but he dug his heels into the grass. He looked frantically at Emily, who was still standing by the wheelchair. "Emily," he gargled through the blood in his mouth. Tell them I took care of you. Tell them it was all for you." The garden went silent again. All eyes turned to my daughter. She looked frail in her silver dress, her legs trembling from the effort of standing after months of atrophy. But her eyes were dry. She looked at the man who had promised to protect her, the man who had turned her home into a prison. She didn't speak. She slowly raised her left hand. She stared at the diamond ring on her finger, the symbol of their union, the symbol of his ownership. With a deliberate, painful motion, she slid the ring off. She held it up for a moment, letting it catch the light. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she threw it. It wasn't a violent throw. It was dismissive. The ring hit Derek squarely in the middle of his forehead, leaving a small red mark before falling into the dirt at his feet. "I am not your wife," Emily said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a final judgment. "I am your victim, and today I am your witness." The crowd erupted into boos as the police shoved Derek toward the waiting cruiser. He was crying now. Ugly, selfish tears of a man who knows he has lost. I watched the taillights fade into the night. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a heavy, exhausting relief, like setting down a load of bricks after a 10-mile hike. 6 months later, the smell of wet concrete and sawdust filled the air, a scent that had always meant home to me. I stood on the second-floor scaffolding of a new building in downtown Bridgeport. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a shelter. The Sarah and Blueberry Center for Women. I watched Emily down below. She was wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard directing a team of contractors. She had gained weight. Her cheeks were full again, glowing with health. She walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the muscle loss, but she walked with her head high. She wasn't the ghost in the wheelchair anymore. She was the project manager. She was the boss. We didn't just survive Derek. We erased him. The courts were swift. With the video evidence, the financial records Leo uncovered, and the testimony of Martha and Dr. Aris's panicked receptionist, the trial was short. Derek was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His assets were seized, liquidated, and returned to the trust. Every cent he tried to steal was now pouring into this foundation, building a safe haven for women who had nowhere else to go. I took a sip of coffee from my thermos. It tasted good. It tasted like peace. I looked at my hands. They were still rough. They were still scarred. But they were clean. I had used them to build a life, and when that life was threatened, I used them to defend it. Emily looked up and saw me watching her. She smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She waved, pointing at a section of the wall that needed inspection. I waved back. People often tell you that family is everything. They say blood is thicker than water. They say you have to forgive because they are your kin. They are wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. It doesn't give anyone the right to use you. It doesn't give anyone the right to hurt you. The true bond between people isn't DNA. It is respect. It is the silent agreement that we will protect each other, that we will lift each other up and not step on each other to get ahead. Respect is the river that keeps love alive. And if someone, no matter who they are, tries to dam that river, if they try to poison the water, you have a duty to break the dam. I am Harrison. I am a builder. And I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can build is a boundary. And the most important thing you can tear down is the lie that you have to suffer in silence. I put on my hard hat. There was work to do. The foundation was set, the walls were going up, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked solid as a rock. From this story, we learn that silence is the greatest weapon of an abuser, but it is also their greatest weakness once broken. We often stay in toxic situations because we feel bound by duty, by marriage vows, or by the fear of scandal. But Harrison and Emily showed us that dignity is worth fighting for. Real love protects. It does not control. And the moment you decide to speak up, the moment you decide to stand, you realize that the monster was only powerful because you were on your knees. Never let loyalty to a title, be it husband or father, silence your instinct for survival. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to fight for your own freedom against someone you trusted, please hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and resilience. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself? I read every single comment. See you in the next video.